Chapter 1. Atsushi-kun, you can leave your bags in the back, Dazai called, leaving his two in the boot of the car. Coming, Dazai-san, Atsushi called up, shrugging his bag off his shoulder as he walked over. He quickly straightened Dazai's bags before leaving his beside them. Well, we'll get going then, the brunette called from beside him, swinging his keys around his finger. Fukazawa nodded. Good. Make sure to let Nakahara-san know that you've left. Of course, Dazai nodded. He flipped the keys in the palm of his hand, gently nudging Atsushi to step away as he shut the boot. Atsushi pushed away the nerves in his stomach. This is my first case outside of Yokohama. He pulled open the car door, pausing as the soft metallic rattling reached his ears. Oh, Kyoka-chan. He turned, pulling his keys from his pocket. The girl met his gaze, coming over to meet him. Atsushi held out his key in his palm. For the apartment, I got another one cut for you. Kyoka slowly took it from him, before wrapping him in a tight embrace. Be careful. Atsushi felt a blush rise to his cheeks. Still unused to the sisterly care and love Kyoka continued to give him. Shifting out of her grip, he smiled. Of course, Kyoka-chan. Make sure to look after yourself too. He glanced up at the other members of the agency who stood around the building waiting to see them off. He offered a small wave, a warmth in his chest, before turning to get into the car. The door shut behind him, the multiple sounds of the outside quieting slightly. Okay, Atsushi, should we get going? Dazai asked, keys rattling as the engine turned on. Yes, Dazai-san. The car rumbled lowly, revving softly as Dazai reversed, before smoothly shifting into motion as he headed into the busy roads of Yokohama. So, Dazai starts. The brunette spared him a glance. Tell me what our case is about, Atsushi. Atsushi frowned, looking at his mentor. Didn't Kunikida-san tell you? He did, Dazai confirmed. I just want to hear your take on it. Oh. A rush of nerves filled his stomach at the reminder of the case and sudden tests Dazai sung on him. He hesitated. Well, it's a case outside of Yokohama in Shibuzawa, Tokyo. Good. The brunette encouraged, absent-mindedly changing lanes as they rolled to a stop before a set of traffic lights. Atsushi watched as a few children bowed their head in thanks in their direction. It's a case where we have to work with the port mafia, Nakahara-san and Akutagawa. Chibi-chan, yes, continue. And Atsushi pushed away his anxiety. It's a case about serial kidnapping of children. None of them have been found and no leads. The police can't find any pattern in the attacks either. Correct. Dazai grinned as he stepped on the accelerator. Very good, Atsushi-kun. You memorized that very quickly. Atsushi blushed slightly and turned his head to look out the window. Thanks to Rampo's continuous needs for various sweets and extra long shopping lists, he huffed quietly to himself. Ni, Dazai-san? What do you think of the case? The brunette was quiet for a moment, letting the silence sit like he usually did. Atsushi knew Dazai had already thought everything through and probably already deduced a few things too. The only thing is that Dazai also tended to like to keep things to himself at times, if they'd be useful later on. For him, cases were like games. Dazai shrugged. I think it's an interesting one. Maybe emotionally provoked since the kidnapping seemed random. So he can see a pattern? And Dazai continued. I think it's a case that we don't need Chibi-chan or Akutagawa for. Atsushi frowned, a small ball of dread turning in his stomach as Atsushi grinned, mischief written in the lines of his face. But it doesn't mean we don't take advantage of the situation, now does it? Dazai-san, that ugly shrimp is going to love working with us. I'll make sure of it. Well, I guess Dazai-san would take advantage of any opportunity to anger Nakahara-san or Kunikida-san. Chapter 2. The bright midday sun shone above them as they stepped out of their car, the rumbling hubbub of Shibuzawa surrounding them. Atsushi looked around at the multiple shops and cafes lining the streets, the various smells mixing together in an odd mess. It was at times like these Atsushi wishes he could turn off his senses. He glanced over as Dazai opened the boot and joined the brunette, letting his hand brush Dazai's fingers as he took the bag. the world momentarily allowing him respite before returning in full. Atsushi clenched his jaw, pushing the discomfort to the back of his mind. Dazai-san, did you tell Nakahara-san when we left we're meeting them at the hotel? Unfortunately, I didn't. Dazai grinned. I think they got here before us, so. Atsushi-kun, should we go surprise them? Atsushi deflated internally. Of course, another opportunity. Quickly shrugging his bag up his shoulder, Atsushi followed Dazai along the clean streets of Shibuzawa, taking in their new environment as they walked the short distance to their hotel. The entrance looked quite ordinary, a soft brush of cooler air causing a few strands of his hair to tickle Atsushi's face. He brushed his cheek absentmindedly, glancing around the small lobby, the interior designed like traditional Japanese homes. Good afternoon, Dazai started. Atsushi shifted his gaze to his mentor, taking in the now flirty demeanour Dazai had adopted. I have 2 rooms booked here under Dazai-Osamu. The woman before him blushed, slightly flustered as she worked at her computer. She cleared her throat. Yes, room 55 and 56. She leant down to the drawer beside her, Dazai still watching her closely. The woman bowed her head, offering the 2 cards. Dazai smiled. Thank you, you're a very beautiful woman. The woman blushed darker. Would you like to commit a double suicide with me? There it is. Atsushi sighed to himself as he watched the blush drain from the woman's face. A slightly disturbed but polite smile coming to her face as she declined Dazai's offer. A slight chime reached Atsushi's ears. He glanced over as the lift doors opened, a familiar duo stepping out into the lobby. Atsushi tensed as they spotted him, before their glances shifted to where Dazai now held the woman's hands, lines of poetry filling the air as he continued his persuasion. Atsushi stepped back. A red glow quickly brightened around the redhead. Akutagawa beside him also took a step back. Nakahara's jaw clenched in anger, a vein ticking at his temple. Damn mackerel, he shouted, sprinting over and tackling Dazai to the ground. Atsushi ignored them as Nakahara shook Dazai back and forth, holding the brunette by the lapels of his jacket. Stepping around them, Atsushi took the 2 cards on the desk. Thank you very much, and sorry for the inconvenience. The woman quickly broke from her shock. No, thank you. You can go up to your rooms. Thank you. Stupid shitty Dazai. Chibi-chan. Mackerel. Shrimp. Atsushi stared at the 2 as they walked down the corridor to their rooms. Nakahara and Atsushi conveniently were in the rooms opposite to theirs. The white-haired man looked to his quiet companion. Akutagawa spared him a glance. What? Atsushi shook his head. Nothing. Then stop looking at me. A familiar annoyance turned in Atsushi's chest. He pushed it away, preferring the quiet between them, and watched the 2 ahead of them bicker. It wasn't long before they got to their rooms, and Atsushi stopped before his, handing Dazai his card. Oi, Chibi-chan, Dazai smirked. Care to change rooms with me? I think I'm allergic to... He made a point of looking all over the redhead's short stature. You. A vein in Nakahara's temple ticked once again. Atsushi stepped forward before they could start fighting again. Thank you, Nakahara-san. I hope we could work well together. The redhead clenched his jaw, turning his blue eyes to meet Atsushi's. It's Chuya, and we don't need the agency's idiots to get in our way. Atsushi smiled and bowed his head slightly. Sorry, Chuya-san. Thank you for working with us. The redhead frowned, looking over him before looking up at Dazai and back. He cleared his throat, holding out a hand. I'm sure I could get along with you, kid. You're Atsushi, right? Cautiously straightening up, Atsushi glanced over at Dazai, the brunette's expression unreadable before shaking Chuya's hand. Yes, Chuya-san. Right, Chuya nodded. I guess you've been briefed on the case. We'll start looking into meeting a couple of the families tomorrow, see where that takes us. Atsushi looked up at Dazai, spotting the slight irritation returning to the man's face. He nodded. Yes, Chuya-san. Good. Chuya turned, making sure not to look at Dazai as he entered his room, door slamming shut behind him. Akutagawa blinked before bowing to Dazai and also entering his room. The corridor fell silent. Hesitantly looking up at Dazai, Atsushi fiddled with his hands. Sorry, Dazai-san, Atsushi-kun. Atsushi felt his mouth freeze sharp. He kept his eyes on the floor, staring somewhere around Dazai's feet. A long arm draped itself over his shoulders. Atsushi stumbled slightly to regain his balance. Don't be friends with Chibi-chan. Atsushi-kun. I'm still your favourite, right? Dazai's eyes were round with forced innocence, cheeks blushed with round circles of pink. Atsushi could imagine stars glistening around his head. He felt his face flatten to a deadpan before sighing as relief filled his chest. He smiled, nodded. Of course, Dazai-san. Dazai clapped happily. Oh, Atsushi-kun. He smiled, now turning his keycard over in his hands. Let's settle into our room. We'll start looking into the case tomorrow. Yes, Dazai-san. Atsushi nodded, a soft beep sounding as the door opened to his room. He glimpsed Dazai standing outside as the door shut. No doubt Atsushi will start looking into the case today. Atsushi slid his card into the holder beside the door, the lights turning on with the action. The room was relatively spacious, with an ensuite to his left and a small kitchen to his right. Just beyond the kitchen, a space was left with a low table on this side and cabinets on the other. Atsushi wandered in, opening the cupboard and carefully taking out the futon. He unfolded it onto the floor, depositing his bag on the ground beside him. I hope we can all work together on this case. He stood, walking to the small kitchen and taking a glass of water. Maybe I could help Dazai-san and Chiyo-san get on? Once I can get on with Akutagawa, that is. He sighed, placing his glass down. A high-pitched hum filled the air. Atsushi paused, listening closely to the source of the noise. He looked up at the ceiling above him. It quieted abruptly. Staring up at the round plastic, Atsushi shrugged to himself before moving to return to his bag to unpack. He knelt down, unzipping it as he started to organize his clothes. The high-pitched ringing returned, only this time in his own ears, and with a spike of pain shooting through his head. Atsushi grimaced, screwing his eyes shut at the sudden wave of dizziness. It passed slowly, the pain fading. He opened his eyes, staring at the blue top in his hands. I hope I'm not getting ill. Chapter 3. Atsushi bowed as he entered the house, slipping off his shoes as Dazai headed in ahead of him. A slightly round woman leading them to the sitting room. He bent down, straightening out his shoes beside Dazai's. He glanced up as Akutagawa placed his in line, followed by Chuya. Atsushi glanced up as the redhead offered a nod, moving further into the house of Akutagawa. At least Chuya-san doesn't seem to mind working with me too much. Atsushi straightened to his feet, breath catching when a wave of dizziness hit him. He leant on the wall beside him, swallowing slowly as the feeling passed. Oi, Junko. Atsushi quickly pushed himself off the wall, pretending to tuck in his shirt, as Akutagawa poked his head around the doorway. The Ravenette looked over him. Stop being pathetic and hurry up. Everyone's waiting for you. Pushing away his immediate annoyance, Atsushi stepping up from the doorway and entered the room. It was a small room with sofas organized around a small coffee table, a fresh pot of tea, and a couple of cups laid upon it. Dazai was sat in one, Chuya and Akutagawa sat in another. The last one was occupied by the woman. Atsushi studied her as he went to sit beside Dazai. She was in her 30s, but the dark circles and lines of stress on her face aged her. She had that classic softness that mothers had about her, that Atsushi had only read about in books. He never really understood until he left the orphanage. He offered her a smile, nodding in greeting as she met his gaze. A small smile on her own graced her lips. A small nudge to his arm had Atsushi looking at the brunette beside him. Dazai gave him a look, nodding at the woman. Ah, right. Clearing his throat softly, Atsushi held her gaze. I'm sorry, Hiyashi-san, for what you've had to go through. Atsushi recalled the conversation he had with Dazai on the way over. He had been told he had somehow had a calming effect on people, more so than what Dazai could do, though Atsushi doubted it. So, Dazai asked him to lead the conversation. Surprisingly, Chuya and Akutagawa had agreed, though the latter was more unwilling. Atsushi refocused on Hiyashi-san before speaking. Yes, well, she paused, dropping her gaze to the floor. It's been difficult, but I can't lose hope. My daughter is out there. She's alive. I know she is. I just need to find her. Atsushi nodded. Of course, and that's why we're here to help you find her. Atsushi nodded. Of course, and that's why we're here to help you find her. He glanced at Dazai, continuing when the brunette nodded. Is there anything you could tell us about the day she went missing? Anything unusual? Hiyashi sniffled, quieting in thought. She shook her head. I'm sorry, I thought it over and over and I can't. She broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. Atsushi quickly got up and handed her a tissue and a cup of tea. She forced a slow breath, nodding him in thanks as she took the cup and wiped her damp cheeks. She shook her head again, now more composed, though her voice shook. I've thought through the events of the day over and over. There's nothing unusual, nothing odd. It was a normal day. She went to school, and by the end of the day, she should have come home. She paused, swallowing shakily. The school told me that she was there the whole day. It was on her way back home she went missing. I keep telling myself I should have gone to pick her up. I should. She broke off again, ducking her head into her hands. Atsushi glanced around to others, their gazes solemn as they sat with the woman's grief. There's nothing to find here. Dazai shifted. What school did she go to? Sendagaya Elementary School. Do you know if there have been any other children having gone missing from the school? Chia asked. The woman shook her head. I'm not sure. I think maybe a boy from a different class, but... She looked over them all. Please help me find my daughter, please. I can't lose her, my baby girl, my baby. Atsushi watched as Akutagawa stood, moving to comfort the woman. The ravenette was reassuring, but clearly made sure not to promise anything. Atsushi watched him. He didn't really understand loss. He was sympathetic for her, understood her sadness somewhat, but then he didn't. He never had someone he could care enough to lose. Don't get him wrong. He'll do anything for the agency, give his life for them, but losing them didn't really occur to him. He didn't think he earned the worth to know it. He shook his head. I'll give her the hope she wants. Baseless hope is harmful, but hope with some basis can be healing, even when the results are unpredictable. We're here to help you find her, Hiyashi-san, so we'll find her, I promise. Atsushi flopped on his futon. His body ached, an odd tiredness pulling at his senses. He felt the shivers run through his body. They visited 3 other families whose children had gone missing. All of them came back with nothing. The children weren't ones to run. There were normal days, nothing unusual happened. They should have walked them back. All these scenarios are the same. The attacks were unprecedented and random. They didn't even seem to occur regularly. All the children were from different schools, bar a few who went to the larger primary schools in Tokyo. Dazai had checked after they got back. Atsushi sighed, grimacing as he picked himself up and forced himself to change. Where are the patterns? His stomach turned suddenly. Atsushi dropped his gloves and tie, rushing to the bathroom. He had just bent over the toilet seat in time for a flood of bile to force its way out of his mouth. Atsushi coughed as it burned his throat, gagging at the bitter taste on his tongue. He was partially glad he hadn't eaten yet. At least the food wouldn't have gone to waste, though he didn't think he could eat now either. He felt his stomach lurching again and shifted forward once more, only for nothing else to come up. He sighed, shakily standing to wash his hands and rinse his mouth, glancing at the toilet as he flushed away his sick before washing his hands again. He splashed his face with the cool water. He braced himself on the sink for a moment, closing his eyes. You're not ill. You can't be ill. Stop being pathetic. You need to help the others. You need to solve this case. Chapter 4. The next morning, Atsushi felt even worse. His stomach felt as though it was caved inwards, though he didn't have any appetite to eat. His skin was hot and clammy, sweat causing his hair to stick to his forehead. Despite the sweat, he was also cold, constant shivers running over his body. He gritted his teeth, pushing himself upright. His ears rang, skin sensitive against his clothes. And again, there was that high-pitched whine from the vents. Atsushi grimaced, not for the first time, hating his heightened senses. Too many times have pushed him into a sensory overload, and every time Dazai had come to cancel his ability to calm him down. Not this time. Atsushi scowled, pushing himself to his feet, ignoring the discomfort that was his body, and forcing himself to shower. The hot water was burning on his skin, the water so loud in his ears it became a constant drone. Atsushi stood there, forcing himself to stay calm as he washed off the clamminess of his skin before shutting it off. The sudden quiet was disconcerting, and he stumbled from the shower, having to grip the sink to dry himself off. A knock sounded from his front door. It was a jarringly loud noise, lashing his eardrums. Atsushi gasped, clamping his hands over his ears as he stepped out of the bathroom. The knock sounded again. Atsushi felt his breath picking up, dropping to his knees. "Stop being pathetic. Pull yourself together." "Atsushi-kun, are you up yet?" a voice called. "Dazai." Atsushi gasped in a breath, stumbling over to his work clothes. He hurriedly put on his pants and trousers, belting them around his waist. The fabric was rough and scratchy. He winced with each movement it had against him. "Atsushi-kun?" Dazai called again. He gasped heavily. The lights of his room too bright. "Phone. I need my phone." "Atsushi?" Atsushi couldn't get his senses to focus. The loud noise, the colours, the fabric against his skin, it was too much. His body ached and it wasn't leaving. He curled up, pressing his head against the wall beside him, and ducked his head. Hands clamped over his ears. The world went blissfully quiet, his own thumping heartbeat and rushing blood filling his head, the only noise accompanying him. Atsushi pulled in a breath, listening as his heartbeat gradually slowed down. He could feel a bead of water trickle down his neck from his hair, soaking into his towel. He could feel his eyes shifting from the tiger's to his own, the confusion in his senses registering danger. A flare of alarms rang in his body as he felt a presence beside him. He flinched at a hand grasping his own. His eyes sprung open, adrenaline flooding him. Yet the world remained in its quiet state, quieter actually. Atsushi breathed heavily, blinking quickly to focus his eyes. Dazai sat before him, a concerned look on his face. "Atsushi-kun, are you with me?" Forcing a slow breath into his lungs, Atsushi nodded. "Sorry, Dazai-san." Dazai shook his head, keeping a hold of his hand. "I told you to call me when this happens." Atsushi nodded. "I know, I couldn't find my phone in time." Dazai sighed, sitting back. "You haven't had one of these for a while." Swallowing past his dry throat, Atsushi nodded. "I know, maybe it's just the unfamiliar environment." "Lie, you know full well it's because you're ill." He shoved the thought away while glancing up at the brunette. "Where are Octagawa and Chie-san?" "I told them to wait outside." "Did they see?" Dazai looked over for a moment before nodding. "I'm sorry, we didn't know why you weren't responding." Dazai glanced up at the two sets of footsteps entering the room. He felt a blush rise to his face, keeping his gaze away from the mafiosos. "I'm sorry." Chie huffed. "Kid, with an ability like yours, I'm surprised you don't have this all the time." Atsushi frowned, looking up at the redhead. "What do you mean?" Chie raised an eyebrow. "Your ability allows you heightened senses equivalent to a tiger, correct?" Atsushi nods. "So you can hear frequencies up to 60 kHz, smell things from 4 miles away, and even your sense of touch is heightened. I can't imagine what your eyes must be doing either, so I take it as a fucking compliment." Octagawa scoffed. "Can't you control it yet?" Atsushi sighed, the relief he felt at Chie's words quickly squashed by Octagawa's. "We should get going. I'll be ready in 5 minutes." The three looked at him before nodding. Dazai cautiously released his hands, studying his face as he stood. Atsushi smiled, nodding despite the rush of information his body has received as his ability returned. "Thank you, Dazai-san." Atsushi watched as the three left, carefully unfolding himself from his position. He suddenly realized his bare abdomen, and blushed even more, hurriedly slipping his shirt over to cover the multiple scars on him. Yet his body was still achy and shivery, random spikes of pain launching through his chest. Atsushi huffed at the annoyance. This couldn't get any worse. Chapter 5. I take that back. Atsushi's head felt stuffy, and he also felt like his senses had been working in overdrive the whole day. His body felt exhausted, and he hadn't even done much. He was lucky none of the others had noticed as he forced himself to act normally. He shook himself mentally, looking up as the man entered the room. His wife, who sat with them, beckoning him over. The two whose son had gone missing only a week ago. Again, the attack seemed random, and there was nothing unusual. The only difference was there was a recording of the attack on a traffic camera. The woman nodded at them. "I'll play the recording now." She held out the remote, pressing one of the buttons. Atsushi stiffened his attention, ignoring his body's discomfort. The recording was during the daytime, and judging by the time of the screen, it was just after school ended. It showed a child no more than 8 years old walking along the street. He wore a rucksack that looked too big for him, his steps bouncy as he walked, a pack of sweets in his hands. There was building works beside him and a red Vauxhall patched back to his left. Atsushi felt the hairs on his neck raise as the boy approached the vehicle. Within the next few seconds, the car door had opened and the boy was pulled into the vehicle. There was a short struggle before the car drove off. A series of shaky breathing filled the air. Atsushi looked over to where the parents sat, the husband comforting his wife, tears in his eyes. The man looked up to meet their gaze. The police already tracked the car. It was found in an abandoned car park. Atsugawa frowned. Which car park was this? I can give you directions if you like. Thank you. Atsushi glanced at Chuya, who sat with a frown on his brow. The redhead shared a look with Dazai. Atsushi looked between them before returning his gaze to the screen. We might have a lead. Atsushi swallowed harshly, pushing away the tension in his shoulders as his senses yet again overwhelmed him, only this time triggered by the vibrations of the car underneath him. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the world scrolling past his window. The car park isn't too far from here, Chuya commented, searching the outside. It's best if we start checking if there's anything around here that we can see along the roads. Atsushi nodded, hoping to keep his discomfort hidden. Luckily, it hadn't taken too long to reach their destination, and none of the others had called out about seeing anything unusual. Atsushi clenched his jaw as the engine finally silenced and the car stilled. It was a relief. His senses didn't usually do this, not like they were recently. It didn't help that his body was feeling weak and tired either. He flinched slightly as the others opened their doors to leave the car, and he hurriedly followed. The sudden motion causing a lightheadedness to flood him, his eyes wavering, but he straightened his back, following Dazai around the space, Chuya and Okutagawa just behind. Looks like the police have already removed the car from here, Chuya commented, looking around the area. It was an old car park, the white paint on the ground faded with potholes littering the tarmac. Dazai crouched down in space, studying the ground. Any track marks or evidence would have been taken by the police too. He frowned, standing. The brunette glanced around, pocketing his hands. Atsushi watched him, his body suddenly feeling hot. Eyesight starting to blacken. Come on, stop it. Oi, Jinko, Okutagawa called. You sense anything here? Atsushi could barely reply. He did, in fact, smell a scent, but it was weak and not one he had smelt from anywhere they had been so far. But his body was betraying him. He felt his breathing pick up, eyelids start to drop. He stumbled slightly, body going weak. Dazai-san, His leg suddenly collapsed beneath him, eyelids dropping shut, leaving him in blackness. His hearing was the last thing to fade, the panicked shouts of the others ringing in his ears. Chapter 6. Dazai ran over as Atsushi dropped bonelessly to the ground, his head bouncing on the hard tarmac. Atsushi! He fell to his knees beside him, pulling the boy upright. Atsushi's head lolled about, body limp. What happened? Dazai, we should take him back to the hotel. Chuya knelt beside him, pressing a hand to Atsushi's forehead. He's burning up. I didn't even realize. Everything was telling me too. His sensory overload. Jinko didn't say anything. Okutagawa scowled. Chuya shifted, nudging Dazai away. Follow me in the car. I'll take him as fast as I can. Dazai nodded, releasing his grip and watching as Chuya carefully lifted Atsushi into his arms, the two glowing red as the redhead used his ability before lifting into the air. Dazai had hurried to the car, Okutagawa close behind. Why didn't he say anything? Chuya landed before his hotel room, glad that he had left the window open as he usually did. He flew inside, rushing to place Atsushi down on the sofa. Atsushi was hot in his arms, still having yet to come to. Come on, kid. He carefully laid him down, rushing to the bathroom and wetting a towel with cold water. He then hurried back, pulling the boy's tie off and braces, quickly pulling the shirt down his arms. He paused for a moment, staring at the multitudes of scars and old burns covering his body. He glimpsed them earlier, but he didn't see the true extent. Shaking himself mentally, Chuya tucked the cold towel under Atsushi's arms and over his chest. The redhead was about to collect another towel when Atsushi roused. The boy was breathing heavily, a feverish look in his eyes. I'm sorry, he gasped. Chuya hurried back, pressing a hand to the boy's forehead. It was still hot. It's fine, kid. You should have told us about this before it got this bad. I don't know how you hid it for so long from us. Please don't hurt me. Kid, why would I? Chuya froze, looking at the boy. He took in the burns, the scars, the fear in his eyes. He also recalled seeing those scars on Akutagawa's body. Who hurt you? Chuya asked, holding his gaze. Did Dazai hurt you? Atsushi's eyes filled with tears. His breathing picked up as his eyes rolled again. Oi! Chuya shook him. Oi, kid, stay with me. Atsushi went limp. Fuck. At that moment, the hotel door clicked open. Chuya stood, hands fisted. He stalked around the sofa, eyeing Dazai as the brunette rushed in. Chuya swung his fist, punching him across the face. Dazai stumbled back slamming against the wall. What the fuck? Chuya grabbed him by the collar. The scars. How did you get those scars? Dazai frowned. Chuya, this isn't... Did you do that to him? Dazai went silent, face blank with shock. Chuya gritted his teeth, ignoring Akutagawa closing the door behind him and going to attend to Atsushi. I thought you changed. Chuya. Dazai sighed, shoving his hands away and straightening to his full height. No, they weren't there because of me. He had them before we met him. They're from the orphanage, from the headmaster. Chuya glared at him. You better be telling the truth. Why do you care? Fuck you, why shouldn't I? Dazai stared at him, an unreadable expression on his face. I've read up on him, Dazai. He went from one hell to another. If I can save him from yet another, I will. Chuya-san, Dazai-san, he's come through. The redhead broke off, glancing at Akutagawa before hurrying over, a quiet Dazai at his heels. He knelt down, shaking his head. He did that earlier. He didn't stay conscious very long. Atsushi stared up to them, gaze shifting over them. I'll be good, he huffed in a shallow breath. It's cold in the cage. Please, I'll be good. I promise. Cage? Chuya took the opportunity to get another cold towel, rushing back to dab the boy's forehead. Atsushi flinched at the touch, his eyes shifting from the tiger's to his own in quick succession. Dazai was quick to hold one of his hands, helping Atsushi calm down. Chuya lifted his gaze to the brunette, narrowing his eyes in warning before returning to try and cool Atsushi down. It took a while, but eventually he cooled slightly, calming down before falling asleep. Chuya sat back, allowing Akutagawa to take over. He looked over at Dazai, the brunette's gaze pinned on Atsushi. What did he mean by cage? Dazai didn't even look at him as he replied. He was kept in a cage in the basement of the orphanage. Most of the abuse he got while he was there was in there. He spared him a glance. I went there to find out more when he first joined the agency. They used to chain him there. How big were the chains? Akutagawa asked. Dazai was quiet for a moment before he shook his head. For a child? Akutagawa replaced the towel over Atsushi with another, glancing at the door as Chuya and Dazai left. Atsushi had barely improved. Whatever he had drained him. He was weak and feverish, and only panicked when he awoke from his ability, forcing him into a sensory overload. Why can't he control his ability yet? Akutagawa didn't want to admit it, but he was worried. Atsushi was like a younger brother to him, and although they went on missions often, he'd never seen him like this. Akutagawa's irritation and anger about Atsushi's lack of control was more to cover his concern. He knew this and admitted it to himself, but it didn't help. Akutagawa absently refilled the cup of water from the jug on the ground, ready for when Atsushi next came to. He shifted his gaze to the boy, frowning at his open eyes. The heterochromatic irises reflect the light, bright with fever. Akutagawa pushed to his knees. Oi, Jinko, drink some water while you're awake. Offering the water, he watched as Atsushi continued to stare at the ceiling. Jinko, take the cup. Atsushi slowly looked down at him, holding his gaze. Now he was looking, Akutagawa could see the fear they held. Atsushi shook his head. Jinko? Atsushi's eyes widened and he slammed a hand over his mouth, slipping off the sofa with a quiet thud. Akutagawa pushed him off, steadying the other when he wavered. What the fuck are you doing? Atsushi just pressed his hands to his ears, ducking his head. He never said a word. Akutagawa let him be, shifting to sit a small distance away from him. He didn't know what Atsushi was seeing or hearing, or if what he was seeing or hearing was real at all. It took a while for Chuya and Dazai to return. The noise the two made as they entered the room caused Atsushi to curl up tighter. The two looked over at him before looking at Akutagawa. "What's wrong?" Chuya asked. Akutagawa just shook his head. "He's scared. He won't say anything." "He's hiding," Dazai concluded. He sighed, moving to the ground to sit beside Atsushi. "He's hiding to protect himself." Chapter 7. Shifting his legs slightly further forwards, Dazai leant against the wall beside him, placing a fresh jug of water on the table beside him. Atsushi had been in and out of consciousness for the past 2 days, in which neither Chuya Akutagawa or himself had progressed much with the case. Worse yet, another child had been kidnapped. Dazai sighed, picking out the small corner of paper in his pocket. The edge was burnt, a logo half cut off by the blackened burn. He turned it over in his hand, thinking back to the car park they'd visited when he'd found it. The logo origin had been easy enough to find. It was a company that ran orphanages. Only there wasn't any orphanages of that company in the area. Well, not running ones. It had taken a bit more searching, but eventually he found one. It was abandoned and was due to be demolished. He tried to visit the place yesterday, but Atsushi's condition had worsened. Now, he was tasked to wait until Chuya and Akutagawa returned from visiting another family. He could only return when they had left. He could only leave when they returned. The brunette sighed again, looking over his subordinate. "Come on, Atsushi, get better." He was almost tempted to take him to the hospital, but going there could risk their case, and Dazai knew Atsushi wouldn't be able to take that. He'd even considered getting Yoshino to come, but Yoshino's abilities had its limits. Illnesses were like poisons, and her ability didn't heal them well. Asking Kunakita to take Atsushi back was also out of the question, for the same reason as going to the hospital. Atsushi would only feel guilt, but for his health, it might be the better option. For some reason, neither Chuya or Akutagawa had said anything on the matter, merely accepting the new shifts they had to take to keep an eye on Atsushi. Could the wind stop? Cars? Dazai took in the boy's pale pallor. His... Shut the fuck up. Oh, I'm a dickhead. Dazai took in the boy's pale pallor, his slight blush to his cheeks and sweatiness to his face. Then, as had happened before, Atsushi opened his eyes. Unlike before, he shot upright, slamming into the floor as he fell, before quickly scrambling away. Dazai stood, looking around the room tensely. It stared back blankly. He frowned, turning to his subordinate. "Atsushi-kun?" "I don't want to," Atsushi shouted. He had his hands gripped to his feet tightly. "I don't want to," Atsushi shouted. He had his hands gripped to his feet tightly, nails digging into the flesh. "Don't make me do it, please. I can't." Tears spilled down his cheeks as he brushed them away harshly, shaking his head. "It hurts." Dazai slowly made his way over, crouching before him. "Atsushi, I'm not going to make you do anything." The boy ducked his head, shaking. "You're lying. If I don't do it, he will." "Who will?" "The headmaster." Dazai stared at the boy, searching his mind for a way to calm him down. "Look, Atsushi, nail and hammer." "What?" "He had a nail and hammer." The white-haired boy rubbed a thumb over a round scar on either foot. Dazai felt his stomach sink in realization. He'd nailed him to the floor of his cell. "You won't You won't leave me alone, will you? Dazai looked up, realizing Atsushi was staring at him. He took a moment to recall his words before shaking his head. No, of course not. He forgot about me down there. I was left alone. I was alone for weeks. I didn't even care about food. I wanted someone to help. Atsushi's voice cracked. But no one saved me. Dazai froze, an ache in his chest. No one saved me. I had Odasaku. Akutagawa had me. Despite everything, Chuya had his brother. But Atsushi? Dazai shifted closer, ignoring the way Atsushi flinched at the movement. Atsushi didn't have anyone. His life was abuse. Atsushi didn't have anyone. His life was abuse, and he only got out of it when he was an adult already. I don't like pain, Dazai-san, Atsushi suddenly said. His voice was rough and hoarse from the dry throat and fever. He didn't seem to notice as he continued. But I don't think I can feel it anymore. I got electrocuted once by Shibuzawa. That hurt. I remember. Dazai nodded. He didn't know what to say to that. He glanced up at the apartment door. He glanced up as the apartment door opened. Chuya and Akutagawa were entering. Dazai was quick to quiet them when they went to speak, pointing to Atsushi. The three looked at the boy. Atsushi's gaze had been focused on the wall opposite to him. Atsushi shivered. But no one came. Atsushi blinked his eyes open. He felt hot and clammy, his body weak. He turned to his right, looking around the space. Dazai sat there, Chuya and Akutagawa's voice sounding elsewhere in the room. He swallowed, throat dry. Dazai-san? Dazai-san? Nope, fuck, no, that doesn't sound like Atsushi, fuck. Dazai-san? The brunette looked up at him, eyes curious for a moment as he searched his face before clearing. Atsushi-kun. His voice was surprised, a small smile gracing his face. You're awake. Atsushi stared for a moment before pushing himself upright. His body ached, muscles trembling with the easy movement. Weak. Here, Dazai helped him up, leaving him to rest against the sofa back before handing him a cup of water. Atsushi took it, staring at the rippling surface. The sudden high-pitched ringing sounded from the vents, and Atsushi closed his eyes, his memories resurfacing. He remembered the water flooding his lungs as he tried to breathe, the headmaster pulling on the chains even as he pushed his head into the liquid. He remembered the water flooding his lungs as he tried to breathe, the headmaster pulling at the chains and pushing his head into the liquid even as he blacked out. Atsushi placed the cup down. Through the whole fever, though he could barely remember it, he felt as though he was reliving the orphanage, and the sound of that vent only sounded like screaming in his mind. Dazai watched him closely. You need a drink. I'm fine, Atsushi. Dazai-san. His voice cracked and swallowed. Dazai-san. His voice cracked and he swallowed past it. Please. The brunette looked over to him before sighing. The headmaster? Atsushi tensed. You spoke in your fever. His breath caught and he clenched at the fabric on his trousers. What did I say? Not much, but enough. So, we know some of what happened to you when you were in there. Pathetic, useless, worthless. You deserve to die. Dazai sighed again. Look, Atsushi-kun. There's not much I can say about it all. But we are here to help you now, so let us. Atsushi frowned, holding Dazai's gaze. He shook himself mentally. You don't deserve the help. How's the case been going? Dazai raised an eyebrow, nodding. It's not been progressing very well. We've been going around and meeting families of children taken, but not getting much. We managed take a look at we also managed to get a look at the evidence of the police took yesterday, but again, there's not much to go on. Atsushi frowned. How long was I out for? 3 days. What? 3 days? Atsushi buried his head into his hands. I wouldn't worry about it, kid. I wouldn't worry about it. It sounded like Snipe. I'm trying to mimic Cheer's voice. I wouldn't worry. That's just a yank. Fuck. Hang on, drink. I wouldn't worry about it, kid. I wouldn't worry about it, kid. The case hadn't progressed whether you were coming or not. That just sounds like a fucking Midwest, though. It's South, like not Middle East. I don't know why I'm explaining. I'm cutting this shit out. I wouldn't worry about it, kid. The kid hadn't progressed whether you were coming or not. Glancing up at the redhead, Atsushi watched as Chuya re-handed him the cup of water. He took it, taking a sip. It was surprisingly pleasant, washing away the stale spit in his mouth. His body still felt weak, and he hated how much his arm shook. I need to shower. I have an idea, though, Darzai piped up. I want to plot on a map where each of their homes are. Why? Akutagawa asked. 'Cause there'll be a pattern there. Chapter 8. Atsushi watched as Darzai completed marking the last location, stepping backwards to look at the map as a whole. The locations were dotted everywhere, some slightly closer together, others further apart. They were distributed randomly too. Atsushi didn't see a pattern at all. He blinked tiredly, yawning into his hand. Maybe it's just me. I don't see a pattern, Chuya commented. Or not. Atsushi looked over the map again. There doesn't even look like it. There doesn't even look to be a cluster. Like if he lived close to an area, he'd take the kids closer to him. Akutagawa reasoned. He gestured to the map, shaking his head. But there isn't a pattern like that. True. That's true, Darzai added. But he stepped forward, frowning. I think that is the pattern. What is? Atsushi asked. The brunette smiled. There not being one. He clicked open his pen again, shifting the ruler around the map. They're scattered quite well, but if you look, he nodded, they're all within approximately 20 meters of each other, so they have around a 10-meter radius. He pointed to one of the dots. This is the home of the most recent kidnapping victim, which is slightly outside of the group, but still within a 20-meter range. Darzai quickly pulled out a compass, drawing out a couple of circles. Atsushi frowned at marks, narrowing his gaze at an area outside of all the circles, but enclosed by it. Darzai gestured to it. This is the area that hasn't been accounted for. Atsushi nodded. It's outside all 10-meter radii. Atsushi nodded. It's outside all the 10-meter radiuses. He could be there. He shifted his gaze to the dot of the most recent. It was actually positioned slightly outside the other. It was actually positioned slightly outside of the other groups, but only enclosing one other location. It looked like the first place he took to expand his attacks, so why miss the space if there wasn't a reason? We should check it out, Chuya commented. Darzai nodded. I have a few thoughts about where to go. What? Atsushi watched as the brunette plucked something from his pocket. It was a corner of a paper, the long edge blackened with burn. Where did you get that from? He asked. Darzai met his gaze. From the car park. He turned it around, showing them the logo. It's a company that ran orphanages. It has one in that area, but it's abandoned now. Darzai met his gaze. From the car park. He turned around, showing them the logo. It's a company that ran orphanages. It has one in that area, but it's abandoned now. Let's go, then. Arctigal stood to his feet, Chuya following behind. Atsushi hesitated before realizing Dazai was watching him. He smiled. Dazai-san, I'm better now. I'm not fully recovered, but better. The other two paused, looking back at him. A rush of embarrassment flooded him. Atsushi forced a smile to be more genuine. You can go without me. I'll be fine. Here, I'll wait. Atsushi, Dazai-san. Atsushi nodded. Please? The brunette hesitated but nodded. Just call any one of us if you need anything. I will. Following them to the door, Atsushi smiled as they left, nodding reassuringly as they glanced back. He went to close the door, pausing when a familiar scent wandered into his room. He poked his head outside, looking along the now empty corridor. It must be a remnant from being ill. He shut the door, He shut the door, turning back into the room. It was quiet now that he was alone, and anxiety filled his chest as he realized the others did not have his protection. Not that they need it. I don't really help much anyway. He sighed, wandering around the small kitchen in the apartment. He sighed, wandering over to the small kitchen in the apartment. He sighed, wandering over the small kitchen and into the... He sighed, wandering over to the small kitchen in the apartment, and collected himself a glass of water. It shook slightly in his grip as he took a sip, and he shoved away any helplessness curled in his chest. They don't need me. They'll be fine. Moving back to the sofa, he sat down, glancing over the map Dazai had plotted. He stared at the gap the others were headed to before the most recent... He stared at the gap the others were headed to before shifting his gaze towards the position of the most recent kidnapping. If he's not there... What if he's not there, in that gap? That's why is his most recent kidnapping so far out? Atsushi stared at the map, frowning. Dazai said there was an abandoned orphanage too, so where did the children go? Plucking his phone from his pocket, Atsushi quickly searched up orphanages in the area. There weren't many, the newest only being a year old. He tapped on it, looking at its location. It zoomed in on a familiar map. It's there, near the abandoned one. He glanced over to the map again. A sudden realization hit him. Orphans don't have families to report they're missing. The headmasters don't care. He stood, glancing at the most recent. It's not that he hasn't covered the area. We missed the child. He felt his breath picking up. It's a trap. Chapter 9. Dazai looked over to the cordoned-off area, the dilapidated building left to decay. There were children playing to his left, barely sparing them a look. He considered them for a moment, not recognizing any of them. I guess he wouldn't let kidnapped children play outside on their own. He glanced at Chuya and Octogawa to his right. Let's head in. Leading the way, Dazai ducked under the tape and slipped through the gap of the temporary fencing. The ground was littered with overgrown weeds, random bits of rubbish joining the mess. Dazai stepped around the small pile, heading up the steps to the building. He glanced at Chuya and Octogawa before kicking the door open. It swung with a bang, the wood shaking upon impact. Stepping through the doorway, Dazai drew his gun, searching the area around him. The inside was relatively untouched. Despite the broken windows and the dust collected on the surfaces and floors, the building was decorated in dark wood, and a yellowish paint on the walls flaking in the corners. Dazai studied the rooms he passed, staring at the floors of any of the Dazai studied the rooms he passed, staring at the floors of any shift. Dazai studied the rooms he passed, staring at the floors for any shift in the dust upon them. So far empty, no signs of anyone. Oi, Dazai. Glancing to his left, Dazai nodded as he joined Chuya, who gestured to a room. Akutagawa followed close behind, having been searching the rooms to the right. Dazai paused, frowning at the room. It was smaller than the others. Empty bookcases lined the walls, the old brittle page left behind as a remnant of the books they once held. A low table in the center of the A low table sat in the center of the room, and upon it was a small girl. A low table sat central to the room, and upon it was a young girl. She wore a school uniform and was young. He vaguely recognized her as one of the missing children. Glancing around the space for a final time, Dazai stepped into the room. The young girl looked up at him, a smile filling her face at the sight of him. "Are you here to take me back to my mummy, sir?" she asked. Dazai carefully studied her, strolling around the table casually before turning to her. "Nothing else unusual. What's your name?" The girl swung her legs, tucking her hands under them as she watched Akutagawa and Chuya follow him into the room. "Hayashi Keiko." "Ah, her. Well, Hayashi-chan," Dazai started. "Your mother's very worried about you." "I know. Will you take me home to her?" The brunette paused, looking over her. "Something's off, but it's not her." "Yes, Hayashi-chan, we will." She smiled at him. But it's okay if you answer a few questions for me?" "Okay," she grinned. Dazai smiled. "How long have you been here?" An hour or so." "An hour? So where have you been before this?" She hesitated, a nervousness coming to her face. "I can't tell you. He told me I'm not allowed to tell you." Chuya frowned. "Who did?" "The man." "Is he here?" Dazai asked. Is he here? Dazai asked. Hayashi shook her head. "He left me here, said he would come for me." "We would?" Dazai felt his eyes widen. He knew what would come. He looked over at Chuya and Atsushi. Atsushi. A sudden buzzing filled the room. Dazai flinched before quickly pulling his phone out of his pocket. He picked it up, pulling it to his ear. "Atsushi, Dazai-san, you need to get out of there. It's a trap." "Atsushi, listen. He knows that we're looking for him. He knows we missed one. We missed a child. There's an orphanage near there. They wouldn't have reported a missing child. Dazai-san, it's a trap." Hayashi suddenly started crying. Dazai broke off. Atsushi's questions going unanswered. The young girl wiped at her eyes, pain in her face. Akutagawa stepped closer to her, frowning. "Hayashi-chan, what's the matter?" The girl sobbed. "It hurts." "What hurts?" The girl looked up at him before lifting her top to show her abdomen. Instead of her chest beneath, a thin layer of wiring wrapped around her, a small stain of blood on her side, and on the wiring, a blinking count line flashed to them. "Fuck. Get it off of her," Chuya shouted. "No." Dazai stared at the short countdown. "It's wide to blow up if we touch it." "No." Dazai stared at the short countdown. "It's wide to blow up if we take it off." Dazai-san, what's happening?" "Dazai-san, what's happening?" "Dazai-san, what's happening?" Atsushi shouted. Dazai felt his heart rate pick up. "Atsushi, get out! Atsushi, get out the hotel, wait by the car." But, Atsushi, "Dazai, I can't take it off." "Dazai, we can't take it off, there's no fucking trigger wire." Chuya called. "No, there's no fucking in that sentence." "Dazai, we can't take it off, there's no trigger wire." Chuya called. Fuck. Dazai hurried over, quickly searching the device. Fuck. The countdown ticked. 5, Darzai glanced over the assortment of wires, floating them in the Darzai glanced over the assortment of wires, floating them around the device. 4. Come on, find it. Come on, find it. 3. Darzai, Chia warned. 2. Fuck, fuck, Darzai shouted, Hayashi crying in his arms. 1. A sudden force shoved Darzai to the ground before a deafening explosion surrounded him. The building rattled the sound of wood splintering and glass shattering filled the air. He ducked his head, waiting for the burn of the heat. Only it didn't come. Darzai slowly opened his eyes. Akutagawa lay beside him, having carefully made sure to keep it from touching Darzai's skin. His ability surrounded them, the black fabric glowing red. His ability surrounded them, the black fabric glowing red. The Ravenet glanced around him before shifting to sand. He held out a hand, pulling Darzai upright. The building had collapsed, the brick crumbled and broken. The damage expanded out towards the other buildings surrounding them, also scorched up and The damage expanded outwards. The other buildings surrounding them also scorched and shattered. Darzai looked around. Hayashi-chan. There was nothing left of her. The explosion having left her small body. There was nothing left of her. The explosion having destroyed her small body. I failed her, Otosaku. Chuya floated in the air above them. Chuya floated in the air just above them, his ability having saved him from the debris. He slowly descended to the ground. 20-meter radius. Darzai looked at him. What? The explosion had around a 20-meter radius. He stared at him. He was trying to destroy Tokyo. A faint mumble sounded. Darzai glanced at his phone in his hand, the screen showing he was someone call of Atsushi. He quickly put the phone to his ear. Atsushi, are you still there? There was a moment of quiet before Atsushi answered. Darzai-san, are you okay? He frowned. Yes, Wait. Atsushi replied. His voice was oddly quiet and calm, though he was focused. Atsushi replied. His voice was oddly quiet and calm, as though he was focusing on something else. Atsushi-kun, what is it? He glanced around at Chuya and Akutagawa, the two watching him curiously. There's a high-pitched noise, Atsushi began. A high-pitched kind of ringing. It's been going on since we got here. He trailed off for a moment. It's like... Darzai heard Atsushi catch his breath. It's screaming. What? Darzai-san, the children are here. They're in the hotel. He broke off suddenly, and Darzai stared at the crumbled ground before him as the sound of a door crashing open filled his ear. Atsushi's panicked breathing sounded from the speaker. Atsushi's panicked breathing sounded before the speaker clicked on the line and went dead, the dial humming ominously. Darzai lifted his gaze, losing the phone to his ear. Chuya and Akutagawa stared at him. Atsushi. Chapter 10. Atsushi pulled his eyes open. His body ached, a sharp pain lacing through his head. There was a stickiness to the side of his head, the metallic stench of blood filling the air. He grimaced, pushing himself upright as he took it into place. Atsushi was sat on a rough concrete floor, the material scratching at his palms. He took in the dark and bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling, just lighting the space. Pipes ran along the walls and ceiling, clanking. Pipes ran along the walls and ceiling, clanking randomly with their contents. Odd cupboards and boxes filled the room, a staircase to his left leading to a door. A damp, musty smell lingered around him. Must be some kind of basement. A sound sounded of a sudden sound of footsteps reached his ears. Atsushi tense, looking to the noise. A young man wandered up to him, a smile on his lips. He had black hair and an angular face. His eyes were slanted, and they were also dark. His lips were in a thin red line across his face. He looked him over. Nakajima Atsushi? Atsushi nodded, finding it hard to get his arms to transform with his ability. Why did I have to get ill now of all times? I was hoping it was you. The man smiled, sitting on the ground beside him, gesturing to the space. I'm sorry this isn't a very pleasant... I'm sorry it's not a pleasant stay. Who are you? Atsushi interrupted. The man frowned before the smile returned. I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Sasaki Dai. I hope we can be friends. He held out his hand. Friends? Atsushi stared at him cautiously, returning the handshake. Atsushi, can I tell you a story now that we're friends? Carefully leaning back against the wall behind him, Atsushi nodded, still trying to will his ability into action. Of course. Sasaki nodded. Thank you. He shifted forward, arms resting on his knees. How should I start this? I guess how every story starts. He shrugs. Once upon a time, there was a young boy, an orphan, who left to an orphanage by his parents who didn't want him anymore. Atsushi kept a frown on his face. Sounds like me. Sasaki continued. This orphan was taken in by the headmaster, promised love and care, but the little boy was lied to, you see. He was small and weak, an easy target to the other children. Atsushi felt his stomach clench, familiar memories of the children of his own orphanage flipping through his mind. Sasaki smiled. Those children bullied him. They beat him, cut him, starved him. But then, as he grew older, the other children did too, and they matured. They didn't see a reason to continue their violence, so they abandoned him, just as the headmaster had done. Sasaki huffed, a slight nostalgic look on his face. You'd think the boy would find it in himself to forgive and forget, but no. This boy watched and he learned. Yes, the headmaster had left him to the cruelty of the wolves. But the wolves were the cruelty. This boy grew up and remembered his pain. He remembered his pain they dealt him, and he never forgave. So he thought a punishment has to be received for justice. Children are cruel. Children are cruel. Could the wind fucking stop? Children are cruel. Children are cruel. They want kindness in return for their hate. Sasaki met his gaze, holding it blankly, and the little boy realized perhaps he should include others. And that little boy realized that perhaps he should include others similarly treated, the same opportunity to join him. Atsushi stared. The boy was him? He's from an orphanage, and that's his story. Is this why he kidnapped the children? What was he planning to do? So, Atsushi, how about it, Atsushi? Will you join me? Breaking eye contact, Atsushi swallowed harshly. His head still ached, the weakness of his illness still pulling at his body. I'm afraid I don't follow, Sasaki-san. Please, call me Dai. Atsushi nodded hesitantly. Dai? The man considered him before standing. Come on, let me show you. Cautiously pushing to his feet, Atsushi winced at the pain lacing through his temple, tapping a hand to the sticky blood that sat there. He stared at the redness on his fingers before quickly following the other man. He led the way deeper into the basement, the air feeling more musty as he walked. Atsushi frowned as quiet sniffling reached his ears. Searching the space before him, Atsushi tried to get his eyes to shift to see the darkness. They remained as they were, the darkness remaining mysterious. "I hope you won't be too surprised," Dai commented. Atsushi pushed away the dread that curled in his stomach at his words. "You kidnapped children. I'm not sure what else could surprise me." Yet, as Atsushi walked into the shadows, he felt his breath catch. The children were there, all of them that were missing. All of them that were missing. They all looked terrified, some teary-eyed, others just sat in shock. Atsushi remembered that feeling. He experienced it for the majority of his life. 18 years of fear. The fear of not knowing what would come, the fear of not knowing what will happen to you, the fear of a pain to come, and the fear of no one coming to save you. Atsushi knew those feelings. Atsushi knew these feelings he saw in them, but he also saw the cautious hope they had upon seeing him, that perhaps they had a saviour. A slight metallic tang hit his throat. Atsushi frowned, searching the children. Almost all of them had a stain of red on their side. Dai stepped closer, to a kid closest to him. The boy tensed, but he didn't look away, like the other children. A hard, determined look in his eyes. The boy tensed, but he didn't look away like the other children. A hard determination in his eyes. Atsushi took in his dark red hair and blue eyes, an odd familiarity touching his senses. Who is he? Then it clicked. The boy reminded him of the picture Dazai always kept. It was of Dazai himself, an older man. Blue-haired and dark. It was of Dazai himself and an older man, blue-eyed and dark-haired. The man was a bit older than Dazai and treated Dazai like a brother in the photo. Atsushi never asked who he was. Dai crouched at the kid's level, tugging at the boy's top. A mess of wires wrapped around his chest, 3 metal needles stabbing into his side, a small timer sat upon it. Atsushi felt his eyes widen. He rigged them all with bombs. Dai sat there. Dai was watching him, a curious look on his face. He stood, nudging the boy back with the other children. "So, you see now, Atsushi?" He smiled softly. "These children are raised and they hate freely without punishment. This is my punishment to them. You understand me, considering your past?" Atsushi looked at him, heart racing. He's crazy. He vaguely remembered something Kunikida had told him. What to do when dealing with someone who can't be reasoned with. Do as you're told. Atsushi smiled. "I understand." He stepped away, trying to adopt an air of casualness. "And I don't disagree. I dealt with the same growing up. My hair was like this because of the other children. Many are my scars from them too." He shrugged. "So, I don't disagree." He looked up, meeting Dai's curious gaze. "So, what do you want to do with them?" Dai considered him for a moment longer before skipping along to stand beside him. "Well, I'm planning to let them go. They'll return to their homes, the bombs each having a radius of approximately 10 meters. They'll be positioned such that there is enough explosive to destroy Shibuya. They are positioned in such a way that there's enough explosives to destroy Shibuya and all the children in it. Atsushi felt his breath pick up and forced himself to smile. I have to save the children. Chapter 11. Atsushi watched as Dai handed the final child a bread roll, shifting back against the wall behind him. His head still pulsed with pain. The cut on his temple finally stopped bleeding. Ability still isn't working properly. He clenched his jaw. Hopefully I won't have to use it. Tapping a hand to his bloody, messy hair, he grimaced at the stickiness. I can get a first aid kit if you want it. I can get a first aid kit to treat that if you want, Dai called. Atsushi looked up, meeting his gaze. He was about to agree when he stopped himself. Where is it? I can get it. Dai hummed. It's upstairs. I can get it. I'll get it. You're clearly still in pain. Atsushi nodded, mind churning. He'll leave. Maybe I can get the children to escape. He met Dai's gaze with a smile. If you could, thank you, Dai. Dai smiled softly. Don't mention it. Watching as the man walked towards the space and up the stairs, Atsushi waited until the door was shut behind him, leaving him in silence. Quickly turning to the children, Atsushi stood hurriedly approaching the children. They backed away from him in panic. Atsushi stopped. Taking in the fear on their faces, it reminded him of the same look the children had at his orphanage when they saw him. Under the smokes and under the hate there was always fear. He swallowed away his agitation, carefully kneeling down to the ground. He raised his hands to them. I don't want to hurt you. He pushed a smile to his face, hoping it was more comforting than he felt. I just want to help. The children were quiet, staring at him fearfully. One of them, the one from before, with dark red hair and blue eyes, stepped forward. You... He paused, taking a calming breath. You were agreeing with him the whole time. You said you would help him. Atsushi shook his head, agitation increasing with the constant awareness of ticking time. I didn't say I disagree. I said I didn't disagree. I never agreed. He lifted the hem of his shirt, showing the boy the multiple scars there, the burns and the cuts. These are what I got from my orphanage. A couple were from the children, but the majority were not. He's wrong. The fault is not with the children. They grow up learning from adults around them. So the fault's with them. Atsushi left his shirt drop, raising his hand placatingly. So, I'm here to help you. The boy stared at him in consideration. Atsushi shifted nervously. I'm with the detective agency too. The boy's blue eyes widened and a small smile finally pulled at his face. He nodded with resolve. His face set with determination and stepped forwards, raising his top to show him the mess of wires around his abdomen. There's a 30-second timer once the bomb is set to go off. They're triggered by either him or if we take it off ourselves. He pointed to the needles in his side. They're sensitive to our heartbeats. Atsushi nodded, quickly processing the information. Okay, so thinking about Kita's teaching, which means there's two sensors. Okay, so thinking about Kunikita's teaching, that means there has to be two triggers, one for the heart sensors and the other for Dai. Kneeling forward, Atsushi carefully shifted the wires around, searching for the two triggers. He paused, staring at two small plastic boxes. The first part was wiring around the boy. The second connected to the wires that led to the needles. Atsushi pulled the second one out of its Atsushi pulled the second one out of the wires, prying open the crudely filled Atsushi pulled out the second one of the wires, prying out the crudely fitted plastic box. The wires met him, a red, a blue, a green. Atsushi nodded. Okay, red. It's always red. Does anyone know if there's a wire cutter around here? The children shuffled, mildly surprised at being suddenly dressed. One of them nodded, getting to their feet and leaving his sight for a moment. Atsushi heard a slight clanging before the child returned and handed him the pair. He smiled. Thank you. Returning to the wires, Atsushi carefully cut the red one, but Returning to the wires, Atsushi carefully put the red between the blades. He hesitated. You don't have time to stop. Atsushi cut the wire. The timer flashed at him, the breath in his lungs catching before it settled and returned to a blank scream that it was before. Atsushi sighed. Okay, we can get this off of you now. He carefully took the needles out of the boy's side and helped the boy out of the mechanism. So, there we are. What's your name? The boy smiled. Sakuro? Well, Sakuro-kun, I'm going to need your help to do this as quickly as we can before Dai gets back. The boy nodded seriously. You saw those two boxes, correct? Again, Sakuro nods. You saw that You saw the one I chose connected to the needles? Yes. I need you to find that box and take off the lid. Do that and we can save everyone. Yes, sir. Atsushi smiled, gesturing for the next child. Sakura quickly hurrying to another and searching the wiring. Double-checking his wires, Atsushi cut the next one. I can do this. I can save the children. Atsushi cut the Atsushi cut the red wire. A slight dizziness reached. Atsushi cut the red wire. Atsushi cut the red wire. A slight dizziness touching in his senses. He smiled, gritting his teeth as it passed. He was only halfway through the children. He was only halfway through the number of children, the other half waiting quietly. Sakura had been efficiently finding the red wire and speeding things up. A couple of the other children doing the same. Dai had yet to return. Atsushi was getting nervous. When will the others get here? Atsushi-san? Sakura called. He was looking past him to the door. He's coming back. Shit. Atsushi hurried to his feet, picking up the collection of bombs he'd taken from the children. Sakura, take this. This is a stupid idea. He handed the boy the wire cutters, looking at him in the eye. But it's my only choice. You know what you're looking for. I need you to continue for me. Cut the red wire, but don't take any of them off until we get another opportunity. Always cut the red wire, okay? Sakura's eyes went wide, the blood draining from his face. Atsushi pushed the tool into his hand, holding him by his shoulder. I need to save you all. I want to do this, but I need your help. Can you do it, Sakura-kun? The boy's breathing picked up, eyes darting in panic. Sakura-kun? Atsushi repeated, hearing soft sounds of footsteps approaching the basement. The boy's resolve hardened. He nodded. Atsushi smiled, shooting to his feet. He glanced around the space, spotting a dark corner beside the collection of cups. Running over, Atsushi shoved the bombs into the gap before sprinting back to his previous position, leaning against the wall. He shut his eyes, forcing his breath to slow. The door clicked open. Atsushi slowly peeled his eyes open, lifting his head from the wall behind him. "Dai, Atsushi," the man greeted. He walked in, carrying a small staircase. The man greeted. He walked down the small staircase with a red box in hand and a bag in the other. "I brought some food as well." Atsushi hated the sudden guilt that turned in his stomach. Why is he being kind to me? How can he be like this but do something so horrible? "How's your head?" Dai asked, holding him the red box. Atsushi shrugged. "It's okay, a bit painful still." Dai winced. "Sorry about that, I didn't know how else to get to talk to you." Atsushi waved a hand dismissively. "It's okay." Opening the box, he picked out a couple of antiseptic wipes, ripping them open and started to wipe the dried blood from his face. Dai again sat opposite to him. There was a frown on his face as he considered him. "Ni, Atsushi, you work for the Armed Detective Agency, don't you have an ability?" "Ni, Atsushi, you work for the Armed Detective Agency, don't you have an ability?" Atsushi looked at him as Dai continued. "I heard you could heal." Atsushi nodded. "I usually can, but it's not working properly right now. I need to find an opportunity to get the children out." He glanced to his left, meeting Sakato's gaze. The boy nodded at him, placing the wire cutters on one of the cupboards around the space. "He's finished." Dai nodded. "Do you know why?" Atsushi sighed. "Illness, I think. It makes my ability go strange." Dai nodded. Dai hummed. If you're ill, it's good to eat to get better quickly." The man rummaged through his bag for a moment, pulling out a juice bottle and a summon onigiri. He knelt forward. "Here." Atsushi smiled, moving to take the items. He paused, Dazai's voice sounding in his head. "Sometimes, if you can't find an opportunity, make one." "Atsushi?" Dai frowned. Meeting his gaze, Atsushi shifted into action. Carefully taking the items before springing... Meeting his gaze, Atsushi shifted into action, carefully taking the items before swinging his fist around and slamming into Dai's temple. The man crumpled to the ground, eyes rolling up to his head. Atsushi shot to his feet, hurrying over to the children. "Anyone who still has the bombs on, take them off now. Anyone who still has the bombs on, take them off and give them to me, quickly, now." There was a rush of movement as they hurried to do it as he said. The remaining devices being handed to him. He nodded, looking them over. "Now, I need to get out of here. Here." He pulled out his wallet from his pocket. Atsushi handed them the spare room card he was given. "Take this and go into the room under the number it says. Do not let anyone else in. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir." No, that's not right. "Yes, sir," they all chorused. Good. Atsushi looked around for Sakato, frowning when he couldn't see him. Instead, he handed the card to the girl closest to him. I'll be staying here to make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else. Now, go. Stay together, all of you." The children nodded, moving to hold each other's hands as they hurried to the staircase. The children nodded, moving to hold each other's hands as they hurried to the staircase. The girl in front turning to make sure the others were with her. She glanced at Atsushi hesitantly, smiling when he nodded at her encouragingly. She turned, leaving the room with the others. Again, Atsushi was left in silence. Picking up the remaining bombs, Atsushi collected them together and hid them with the others. I wonder where Sakato went. He must be with them. Atsushi-san? Whipping around, Atsushi stared at the small boy before him. Sakura-kun? Why are you still here? You shouldn't be here. Sakura shifted on his feet nervously. I don't want to go back. Atsushi knelt before him, holding his... Atsushi knelt before him, holding him by the shoulders. It's dangerous here. I want to protect you. If you go now, you might be able to catch up with the others. No! Sakura pushed away his arms before running to him. Sakura pushed away his arms before running into him, arms wrapping tightly around Atsushi's body. Sakura paused. Sakura paused, pushing his arms away before running into him, arms wrapping around tightly. Sakura pushed away his arms before running into him, arms wrapping tightly around his body. Atsushi froze in shock. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to go back there. Please, Atsushi-san. Atsushi frowned. Atsushi swallowed, forcing himself into motion. He carefully cuddled the boy back. Go back where? To the orphanage. What? Please, they aren't nice to me. It hurts. Sakura was shaking, his hot tears dripping onto Atsushi's shirt. Atsushi nodded, realization hitting him. He's the orphan that wasn't reported. Okay, I won't let you go back there. I promise you that. I'll keep you safe. I won't let you live the life I have. A soft groan sounded behind them. Atsushi's breath caught. He quickly pushed Sakura away, the boy stumbling slightly at the action. Go! Atsushi whispered harshly. Hide! Sakura stared, eyes wide, before sprinting further into the basement. After a moment, Atsushi lost sight of him as he hid behind a cupboard. In a cupboard tucked away behind a row of pipes. Atsushi spun back around, looking at Dai. The man grimaced, pulling his eyes open. Atsushi was just about to punch him again when Dai looked up at him, confusion on his face. Atsushi faltered. Atsushi? Choosing not to reply, Atsushi watched as the man pushed to a sitting position, looking around the empty basement. Where are the children? I need to buy time. Atsushi swallowed. I let them go. Dai's gaze whipped around to meet his. What? I let them go, Atsushi repeated. The other's eyes went hard. Why? Atsushi felt panic rising in his chest. Why? He shook his head. Tell him the truth. Because it's not the children who deserve punishment. He sighed. It's the adults. It's the adults who raise them to be like that. I don't think like that, right? Dai stared at him. All my work. Look, Atsushi crouched down to his level. It's the adults. They were the ones who were cruel to the children. They didn't love them. They didn't give them enough attention. They didn't give them the attention they needed or the care they want. The children were left to themselves, so they work for their attention by... The children were left to themselves, so they work for attention... The children were left to themselves, so they work for the attention themselves by doing cruel things. The adults don't care to stop them. Atsushi clenched his jaw. Don't you see? It's not the children that deserve punishment. They're the victims themselves. It's the people like the headmaster that deserve it. Atsushi blinked, mind suddenly clearing. What are you saying? Dai stared at him, considering him. I see. You do? Of course, you're like me. I need to understand different perspectives of... Of course, you're like me. I need to understand perspectives of others to do the right thing. My past is twisted by my own experiences. Yours with yours. But you've pointed out the common factor. I agree. Atsushi sighed, an odd kind of relief filling his chest. He glanced over to the cupboard Sakuto was hiding in, searching the cupboard for any sign of him. The cupboard door wavered slightly. So, Dai started, will you help me? I'm sorry? Would you help me do this correctly? Punish the adults that wronged us? Atsushi frowned. He hated the well of want in his chest. He wanted to help Dai punish the people who wronged them, and those who wronged others like him. He felt anger and hurt curl into his chest, and Atsushi knew he wouldn't punish. He'd kill. He'd make them pay by pain and then with their lives, and it scared him, because Atsushi knew he'd enjoy it, and he wouldn't stop. Killing would become a joy. Atsushi knew himself more than he wanted to. He knew what he could do, and knew he knew what he could do, and he knew he had to do it. He knew what he could do, and he knew he had the will to do it if he chose to. But he didn't, and hoped he never would. He was with the agency now, and Atsushi had always been one to value life. He nodded. I'll help you. Chapter 12. Dazai sprinted up the few steps to the hotel entrance, Chuya and Okutagawa on his heels. His heart thumped in his chest, a panic he'd only felt once before, grating his nerves. We're coming, Atsushi. Please, just be okay. Walking hurriedly to the front desk, Dazai leaned down on the surface, staring down at the receptionist. Where is he? The woman's eyes went wide. Excuse me? Dazai gritted his teeth. The person who's been kidnapping all the children is here in the hotel. You must know who I'm talking about. I'm afraid... Slamming his fist on the surface, Dazai leant forward. I would tell if I were you. The woman swallowed before nodding. A sudden smirk pulled at her lips. He's a kind man, you know. We've gotten quite close. I agree with him, of course. I think your friend might find him quite convincing, though. Of course she works with him. I thought there was something off the second I saw her. Dazai forced a calming breath. Who are you to him? His suitor, if you would put a name to it. Sometimes in his company. I'm sure a man like you understands. Am I right, Dazai-san? Dazai chuckled softly. It was a discordant sound. He pulled his gun from his sheath, laying it on the desk, nozzle aligned with her chest. How would he feel about losing you? The woman's smoke dropped from her face. She grimaced. Fine, the basement. I know he'll easily be able to deal with you lot. I would send a message to your loved ones if I were you. Dazai straightened up with a nod before lifting his gun and firing. A burst of blood splattered to the paper behind her. Her head dropping backwards as her body flopped limply onto the chair. Come on, Chuya nudged him. We don't know how much time we have left. Glancing at the redhead and Okutagawa, Dazai quickly led the way, traversing through a few corridors before reaching a doorway. He paused. Glancing through the glass panel, he frowned at the staircase, which led to a few doors. Dazai pushed it open, quietly descending the steps. A soft echo of the others followed behind. The doors lead to the other maintenance offices or cupboards. Nothing of any significance. He turned his gaze forward, seeing this next step of stairs beyond it. He moved to open it. I'll help you. Dazai froze, the familiar voice just audible through the door. Atsushi. Do you promise? Another voice asked. There was a pause. Yes. He is stalling for time. Dazai glanced behind him to the mafiosos. The kidnapper is down there with him. He reported lowly. Chuya nodded. What are we waiting for then? What if he had bombs? Akutagawa asked. What if he's tied Jinko up just like he did with the girl? Dazai frowned. Well, it's better to go in and save him then. Without pause, Dazai pushed open the door and slowly stepped down the stairs, making sure his footsteps were heard. He pushed a smile to his face as he surveyed the room, locking gazes with the unfamiliar man before him, a nervous-looking Atsushi opposite. What is it that Atsushi could help you with? Maybe we could be of use. Dazai-san, Atsushi said, his voice a combination of shock and relief. The man looked between them before turning to Atsushi, glaring furiously. You tricked me. Atsushi frowned, waving his hand playfully. No, I didn't. Dai, let me. You betrayed me. Before Dazai could blink, Dai had drawn a knife and plunged it into Atsushi's chest. Dazai felt his breath stutter, a strange surreal sensation falling over him. He vaguely heard Chuya and Akutagawa shouting, but all he could do was watch. Atsushi stumbled backwards, clutching at the knife in his chest. His eyes were wide in shock and panic, hands trying to push the man away as he pushed the knife deeper. A splatter of blood specked his lips. Atsushi! Dazai didn't even realize his own voice as he drew his gun, aiming to fire at the stranger. His bullet hit the man in the shoulder, Chuya already there, tackling him to the ground. The man's grip on the knife tightened. A faint squelch pounded as the blade was pulled free. Dazai ran forward, grabbing Atsushi's shoulders as the boy stumbled. Atsushi, hold on. Atsushi, just hold on. Atsushi brought a bloodied hand up to grip Dazai's white shirt. He swallowed, pained. The bombs have a second trigger. Dai has it. They're behind the cupboard over there. I don't know. Dazai straightened up, looking in the direction Atsushi had directed. Okay, hold on. Sprinting over, he took a brief search before he finds the mess of wires. Taking in the collection, he ran back to Akutagawa. Take them, use your ability. He looked back around, seeing Chuya still had the man pinned to the ground. A low red glow of his ability covered his body. Dazai fostered his hands, lining the nozzle of his gun with the man's head. Akutagawa, you ready? Yes, Dazai-san. Dazai stared at the man, the other starting to laugh, his gaze shifting past him. Dazai squeezed the trigger. The man's body fell limp, a bloody mess of imploded bone and flesh where his face used to be. A muted explosion sounded from behind him, but Dazai didn't spare it a look. He pulled the trigger again and again and again. Chuya's hand fell in his wrist. That's enough, Dazai. Jinko? Atsushi-san. No. Atsushi-san. Dazai spun around, watching as a young boy sprinted from inside a cupboard. His gaze shifted. He then shifted his gaze to the sound of shallow breathing. The breaths gasping and hiding. I don't know. It's just a hard time breathing. Atsushi clutched at his shirt, the once white shirt now dark red. His knees buckled beneath him, and Atsushi launched to catch him as he fell. Atsushi. Dazai carefully lowered him to the ground, pulling Atsushi's hands away from the wound. A rush of dark fabric quickly wrapped itself around the boy's chest, his pain gasp filling the air. Darzai glanced at Dr. Gower, the Ravenet looking tense as he used his ability, then returned his gaze to the boy in his arms. Atsushi-san! The boy was suddenly beside him, tears pouring down his cheeks. Darzai watched as the boy grabbed one of Atsushi's bloody hands, mind barely comprehending the scene. Atsushi panted shallowly. He stared up at Darzai, eyes shifting from his own to the tiger's. Sakuto-san. Atsushi said softly. It's okay. Everything will be okay. I promised you, remember? Atsushi-san, the boy cried. Atsushi weakly gripped his hand tighter. Sakuto-san, can you do me a favor? Can you close your eyes for me? There was a moment's hesitation before the boy complied, squeezing his eyes shut tightly. Atsushi smiled, looking back up at Darzai. Darzai quickly pushed his brain into action. Chuya, get Yoshino. Where? At the agency. Go. Now. Darzai didn't register the crashing of brick as Chuya sped away. He focused on Atsushi, trying to work out how to save him. Darzai-san? It's okay, Atsushi. You'll be okay. Don't talk. You need to save your energy. Wait, Atsushi, please just listen to me. Darzai stared into Atsushi's arms, the irises still shifting with his ability. Darzai quickly placed a hand on the boys, stopping the action. Atsushi looked up at him steadily. Did all the kids get out safely? Darzai frowned. I gave them the card to my room. They should all be there. Okay, we can check after, okay? I'm sure they're safe. Just let's focus on you. I want to tell you something. Atsushi interrupted. Darzai ducked his head, shaking it. No, Atsushi, don't. Darzai-san, that's enough. Atsushi, stop talking. Darzai-san, look at me. Atsushi's voice was soft but firm as Darzai met his gaze. He found Atsushi to be watching him. My ability isn't working. My body can't keep up with this. He quickly continued before Darzai could intervene. I won't have time to say anything if you don't let me. Darzai felt dryness climb in his throat. He shook his head again, an unfamiliar wetness collecting in his eyes. Thank you, Darzai-san. No, Darzai gritted his teeth. You can't do this. Thank you for giving me people I can care for. Maybe they also care for me too. Darzai hated the smile on Atsushi's lips. He hated the helplessness he felt. He wanted Atsushi to stop, but Darzai found himself listening, and for that he hated himself even more. Thank you for giving me a place in the world, and for giving me a place to stay, and clothes of my own, and food I've never tried before. Darzai felt a wet drop on his cheek, and hurriedly wiped it away. That's enough, Atsushi, stop it. You can't do this to me. He hated how his voice broke. Atsushi's eyes go hazy, his breaths more and more shallow. I wasn't useless to you, was I? Darzai shook his head. How could you ever been ni, Darzai-san? Atsushi blinked slowly. I have a favor to ask. The boy shifted his gaze to his left, the young boy whose eyes were still squeezed shut, and gripping Atsushi's hand. Could you look after him too? What? Atsushi's breathing started to become uneven, eyes slipping down his face. He gasped painfully. Ni, Darzai-san. He coughed more, blood splattering his lips. Thank you for protecting me. He met his gaze, a smile put on his face. He seemed to push the words next out of his mouth, his next words from his mouth. Protecting an orphan. Atsushi's body went limp, chest stilling. Darzai stared at his eyes, the sightless eyes staring back at him. He shook him. Atsushi. He shook him again, head lolling around limply on the ground. Atsushi. Tears dropped down his chest, and Dazai's chest ached. He pulled Atsushi upright, holding him close, the warmth on his body still lingering in his arms. Dazai listened for a heartbeat. Silence answered him. Protect the orphans. Dazai gripped Atsushi tighter, jaw clenching. I failed him, Odasaku. Atsushi said those words. He said them, but I did nothing for him. I didn't do anything. His voice was rough, throat tight. I didn't do anything for him. He deserves so much better. I took him to the agency, but it was the others who welcomed him. Kunikira who trained him, Kyoko who gave him a family, and he took her in. I did nothing. Dazai held Atsushi down in his arms. Atsushi's eyes still staring at him. Atsushi didn't have the heart to close them. Why did he say that? Akutagawa shifted beside him, moving to crouch as he carefully unraveled his ability from Atsushi's chest. The bloody wound now clear to see, with the multiple scars from Atsushi's past evident on his body. The Ravenet knelt, gently closing Atsushi's eyes. Because he was kind and you're the first person to help him. He looked over at Dazai. His life was torture and you're the first one to show him kindness. Dazai met the other's gaze, recalling all his oaths of the mafioso. If I was his kindness, he swallowed, looking down at the boy beside him, tear stains on his face as his eyes squeezed sharp. With his eyes squeezed sharp, Dazai nodded. I'll do better. Sakuto felt Atsushi's hand go limp, but he didn't want to open his eyes, but he did. Atsushi's hand was going cold under his hand. His eyes were closed too. There was blood all over him, but old scars riddled his skin. Sakuto stared at the burns along the young man's ribs, recognizing them from his own side. Atsushi-san understood me because he went through the same. He looked back to his face. He knew, but he had to ask. Why are his eyes closed? The two men looked at him. Sakuto felt his arms trembling. Why isn't he waking up? A sudden faint blue ball rose from Atsushi's chest. Sakuto stared at it, eyes tears stopping. The light hovered for a moment before it shot towards him. Sakuto didn't even have time to scream as the immense pain seared through his body. He screamed, slight dimming as he fell to black. Dazai stared at the blue light. What is... It suddenly shot away, absorbing into the boy's chest. The boy screamed, writhing on the ground as he collapsed before stilling. Dazai felt his breath catch. As he watched, two locks of the boy's hair changed colour, one to white and the other to black, contrasting the deep red of his own. Dazai gasped, That's like Atsushi. That's... Carefully letting Atsushi to the ground, Dazai kept a hand of his hand as he moved over to the boy. He studied his hair for a moment before gently shaking him. The boy roused. Dazai swallowed past his dry throat. What's your name, kid? The boy frowned, looking confused. Sakuto. Oda Sakuto. A burst of shock filled his chest. Dazai stared at the boy before looking to Atsushi. He gripped his hand tighter. Ni Atsushi. You gave me a second chance. Thank you. I'll keep your promise on my life. Both to you and Odasaku. I'll do my best for the boy. You'll see. My very best. I'll do everything I should have done for you, Atsushi. For him, I promise. I'll look after you too. I'll look after you, Odasakuto. Odasaku. Epilogue. Dazai couldn't describe his emotions at the best of times, but the grief and loss he felt upon arriving back to the agency with a young orphan boy instead of Atsushi was a feeling he'd never be able to describe in his lifetime. The boy, Odasaku, had quickly fallen to fever after gaining Atsushi's ability, and was being treated by a grieving Yoshino, who'd been too late to the scene to save their white-haired companion. Family. He wasn't a companion. Chuya and Akutagawa had taken it upon themselves to escort Atsushi's body. Dazai couldn't stand to be in its presence, the guilt overpowering the disrespect of his actions. He, all at once, hated how the body became an object rather than a person. It, not him. He hated how he never noticed that difference before. The brunette glanced at the rearview mirror, watching Akutagawa drive behind. He looked away quickly, steering into the agency's car park and switching off the engine. The resulting silence was deafening. Dazai! He looked up, Dazai watching a confused but concerned Kunikida sprinting out of the building. Fukuzawa and Kyoka close behind, the rest following shortly. He didn't want this. Kunikida ran up to the car, pulling the door open. Dazai, are you okay? The blonde looked over at him before shifting his gaze back toward Yoshino held Odasaku. Kunikida frowned. Who's that? Where's Atsushi? A piercing scream cut through the air. Dazai felt his grip on the steering wheel tighten. Kyoka didn't stop, her voice going hoarse, as Akutagawa and Chuya stepped out of the car behind. He felt Kunikida look at him, the blonde going pale. Atsushi, where's Dazai? No, jeez, no. Dazai, where's Atsushi? The blonde shook his head, breath stuttering. He's dead. Kunikida stepped away, arms dropping to his side in shock. He stared at the body, disbelief written on his face. It morphed into anger. What happened? Dazai looked away, forcing himself to control the emotions flooding in his chest. He protected the kidnapped children. He got ill, his ability stopped working properly. Dazai paused, looking at the blonde. I couldn't save him. Tears were running down Kunikida's cheeks, the anger still in his eyes. Is the man who killed him dead? Dead? Yes, I killed him. The blonde nodded, wiping his tears away wiping the tears away quickly as Moore hurried to join them. Who's the kid? Dazai glanced at the rearview mirror. His name's Oda Sakuto. He's an orphan. Atsushi asked me to look after him before. Dazai looked back to Kunikida. Atsushi's ability went to him. Kunikida frowned in shock. The ability transferred? Apparently. Dazai sighed. It's a promise. Another one. He hesitated. Kunikida, I can't do this by myself. I barely did anything for Atsushi, but I promised to do better. Please help me do it better this time, Kunikida. The blonde stared at him, shock written on his face, in the lines of his face. He nodded slowly. You'll have my help. No matter what you do, you will hold yourself to that promise, and I will make sure of that. The boy is Atsushi's legacy. Your promise, your responsibility. You will love and care for the boy like he deserves. Kunikida nodded. And I will help you, Dazai. You won't be alone. Dazai felt tears run down his cheeks as he looked at Kunikida. The blonde stood tall, reminding him much of how Odasaku was, caring but strong, like a brother. I won't be alone, Dazai mumbled to himself. He looked back at Sakuto before shifting his gaze to where Kyoko was cradling Atsushi's body. I'll do my best, I promise.